So we're seeing, I got that wrong, but we were referring to an area of the Atlantic which is known to produce hurricanes, some of which I have experienced the remnants of. The explosion in the engine room at 2 a.m. was wholly a surprise. No effect in the machinery or carelessness in the men had been noticed, yet without warning the ship was racked from end to end with a colossal shock. Lieutenant Clens hurried to the engine room, finding the fuel tank and most of the mechanism shattered, and engineers Rabbe and Schneider instantly killed. Our situation had suddenly become grave indeed, for though the chemical air regenerators were intact, and though we could use devices for raising and submerging the ship, and opening the hatches as long as compressed air and storage batteries might hold out, we were powerless to propel or guide the submarine. To seek rescue in the lifeboats would be to deliver ourselves into the hands of the enemies, unreasonably embittered against our great German nation, and our wireless had failed ever since the Victory affair had put us in touch with fellow U-boat of the Imperial Navy. From the hour of the accident till July 2nd, we drifted constantly to the south, almost without plans and encountering no vessel. Dolphins still encircled the U-29, a somewhat remarkable circumstance considering the distance we had covered. On the morning of July 2nd, we sighted a warship flying American colors, and the men became very restless in their desire to surrender. Finally, Lieutenant Clens had to shoot a seaman named Traube, who urged this un-German act with especial violence. This quieted the crew for a time, and we submerged unseen. The next afternoon, a dense flock of seabirds appeared from the south, and the ocean began to heave ominously. Closing our hatches, we awaited developments until we realized that we must either submerge or be swamped in the mounting waves. Our air pressure and electricity were diminishing, and we wished to avoid all unnecessary use of our slender mechanical resources. But in this case, there was no choice. We did not descend far, and when, after several hours, the sea was calmer, we decided to return to the surface. Here, however, a new trouble developed, for the ship failed to respond to our direction in spite of all that the mechanisms could do. As the men grew more frightened at this undersea imprisonment, some of them began to mutter again about Lieutenant Clens's ivory image, but the sight of an automatic pistol calmed them. Well, stopped their actions. We kept the poor devils as busy as we could, tinkering at the machinery even when we knew it was useless. Clens and I had usually slept at different times, and it was during my sleep about 5 a.m., July 4th, that the general mutiny broke loose. The 6 remaining pigs of seamen, suspecting that we were lost, had suddenly burst into mad fury at our refusal to surrender to the Yankee battleship 2 days before, and were in a delirium of cursing and destruction. They roared like animals that they were, and broke instruments and furniture indiscriminately, screaming about such nonsense as the curse of the ivory image and the dark dead youth who looked at them and swam away. Lieutenant Clens seemed paralyzed and inefficient, as one might expect of a soft, womanish Rhinelander. I shot all 6 men, for it was necessary, and made sure that none remained alive. And graven images, there's a saying attributed to Abraham where it's, an evil fire being causes attraction to the graven images. Some evil fire being near it. So it appears to be true in some instances. I shot all 6 men, for it was necessary, and made sure that none remained alive. We expelled the bodies through the double hatches and were alone in the U-29. Clens seemed very nervous and drank very heavily. It was decided that we remain alive as long as possible, using the large stock of provisions and chemical supply of oxygen, none of which had suffered from the crazy antics of those swine-hounded seamen. Our compasses, depth gauges, and other delicate instruments were ruined, so that henceforth our only reckoning would be guesswork, based on our watches, the calendar, and our apparent drift as judged by any objects we might spy through the portholes or from the conning tower. Fortunately, we had storage batteries still capable of long use, both for interior lighting and for the searchlight. We often cast a beam around the ship, but only saw dolphins swimming parallel to our own drifting course. I was scientifically interested in those dolphins, for though the ordinary Delphinus delphis is a cetacean mammal, unable to subsist without air, I watched one of the swimmers closely for 2 hours, and did not see him alter his submerged condition. With the passage of time, Cleanse and I had decided that we were still drifting south. Meanwhile, seeking deeper and deeper, we noted the marine fauna and flora, and read much on the subject in the books, and carried with me for spare moments. I could not help observing, however, the interior scientific knowledge of my companions. His mind was not Prussian, but given to imaginings and speculations which have no value. The fact of our coming death affected him curiously, and would frequently pray in remorse over the men, women, and children we had seen to the bottom, forgetting all the things were noble which serve the German state. After a time he became noticeably unbalanced, gazing for hours at his ivory image, and weaving fanciful stories of the lost and the forgotten things under the sea. Sometimes, as a psychological experiment, I would lead him on in the wanderings, and listen to his endless poetical quotations and tales of sunken ships. I was very sorry for him, for I disliked to see a German suffer, but he was not a good man to die with, for I myself was proud of knowing how the fatherland would revere my memory, and how my sons would be taught to be men like me. On August 9th, we espied the ocean floor and sent a powerful beam from the searchlight over it, and was a vast, undulating plain, mostly covered with seaweed and strewn with objects of puzzling contour, draped with weeds and encrusted with barnacles which Cleanse declared must be ancient ships lying in their graves. He was puzzled by one thing. A peak, a solid matter, protruding above the ocean bed nearly 4 feet at its apex, and about 2 feet thick, with flat sides and smooth upper surfaces which met at a very obtuse angle. I thought that a bit of outcropping rock, but Cleanse thought he saw carvings on it. After a while he began to shudder, and turned away from the scene as if frightened, yet could give no explanation, save that he was overcome with the vastness, darkness, remoteness, antiquity, and mystery of the oceanic abyss. His mind was tired, but I am always a German, and was quick to notice 2 things. The U-29 was standing in the deep-sea pressure splendidly, and that the peculiar dolphins were still about us, even at a depth where the existence of high organisms is considered impossible by most naturalists. That I previously overestimated our depth, I was sure, but nonetheless, we must still be deep enough to make these phenomena remarkable. Our southward speed, as gauged by the ocean floor, was about as I estimated from the organisms past at higher levels. It was about 3:15 p.m., August 12th. That poor Cleanse went wholly mad. He'd been in the conning tower using the searchlight when I saw him bound into the library compartment where I sat reading, and his face at once betrayed him. I'll repeat here what he said, underlying the words he emphasized. He is calling, I hear him, we must go. As he spoke, he took his ivory image from the table, pocketed it, and seized my arm in an effort to drag me into the companionway to the deck. In a moment, I understood that I meant to open the hatch and plunge with me into the water outside, a vagary of suicidal and homicidal maniac, for which I was scarcely prepared. As I hung back and attempted to soothe him until he grew more violent, saying, "Come now, do not wait until later. It is best to repent and be forgiven than to defy and be condemned." Then I tried the opposite of the soothing plan, and told him that he was mad, pitifully demented, but he was unmoved and cried, "If I am mad, it is mercy. May the entities pity the man who, in his callousness, can remain sane to the hideous end. Come and be mad, whilst he calls still with mercy." This outburst seemed to relieve a pressure in his brain, for as he finished he grew much milder, asking me to let him depart alone if I would not accompany him. My course at once became clear. He was a German, but only a Rhinelander and a commoner, and he was now a potentially dangerous madman. By complying with the suicidal request, I could immediately free myself from one who was no longer a companion, but a menace. I asked him to give me the ivory image before he went, but this request brought from him such uncanny laughter that I did not repeat it. Then I asked him if he wished to leave any keepsake or lock of hair for the family in Germany, in case I should be rescued. But again he gave me the strange laugh. So, as he climbed the ladder, I went to the levers, and allowing proper time intervals, operated the machinery, which sent him to his death. After I saw that he was no longer in the boat, I threw the searchlight around the water in an effort to obtain a last glimpse of him, since I wished to ascertain whether the water pressure would flatten him as it theoretically should, or whether the body would be unaffected, like those extraordinary dolphins. I did not, however, succeed in finding my late companion, for the dolphins were massed thickly and obscuringly about the conning tower. That evening I regretted that I had not taken the ivory image surreptitiously from the poor cleanse's pocket as he left, for the memory of it fascinated me. I could not forget the youthful, beautiful head with its leafy crown. Although I am not by nature an artist, I was also sorry that I had no equal with whom to converse. Cleanse, although not my mental equal, was much better than no one. I did not sleep well that night and wondered exactly when the end would come. Surely I had little enough chance of rescue. The next day, I descended into the conning tower and commenced the customary searchlight explorations. Northward, the view was much the same as it had been in all the 4 days since we had sighted the bottom. But I perceived that the drifting of the U-29 was less rapid. As I swung the beam around to the south, I noticed that the ocean floor ahead fell away in marked declivity and bore curiously regular blocks of stone in certain places, disposed as if in accordance with definite patterns. The boat did not at once descend to match the greater ocean depth, so I was soon forced to adjust the searchlight to cast a sharply downward beam. Owing to the abruptness of the change, a wire was disconnected, which necessitated a delay of many minutes for repairs, but at length the light streamed on again, flooding the marine valley below me. I am not given to emotion of any kind, but my amazement was very, very great when I saw that it lay revealed in the electrical glow. Yet, as one reared in the best culture of Prussia, I should not have been amazed, for geology and tradition alike tell us of great transpositions in oceanic and continental areas. What I saw was of an extended and elaborate array of ruined edifices, of all magnificent though unclassified architecture, and in various stages of preservation. Most appeared to be of marble, gleaming whitely in the rays of the searchlight, and the general plan was of a large city at the bottom of a narrow valley with numerous isolated temples and villas on the steep slopes above. Roofs were fallen and columns were broken, but there still remained an air of immemorially ancient splendor which nothing could efface. Confronted at last with Atlantis, I had formerly deemed largely a myth. Well, myths have meaning and purpose, don't they? I was the most eager of explorers. At the bottom of that valley, a river once had flowed, for I examined the scene more closely. I beheld the remains of stone and marble bridges and seawalls and terraces and embankments, once verdant and beautiful. In my enthusiasm, I became nearly as idiotic and sentimental as poor Cleanse, and was very, very tardy in noticing that the southward current had ceased at last, allowing the U-29 to settle down slowly upon the sunken city, as an airplane settles upon a town of the upper earth. I was slow, too, in realizing that the school of unusual dolphins had vanished. In about 2 hours, the boat rested in the paved plaza, close to the rocky wall of the valley. On one side, I could view the entire city as it sloped from the plaza down to the old riverbank on the other side. In startling proximity, I was confronted by the richly ornate and perfectly preserved facade of a great building, evidently a temple, hollowed from the solid rock. Of the original workmanship of this titanic thing, I can only make conjectures. The facade of immense magnitude, apparently and widely distributed. In the great center yawns a great open door, reached by an impressive flight of steps, and surrounded by the exquisite carvings like the figures of bacchanals in relief. Foremost of all are the great columns and frieze, both decorated with sculptures and inexpressible beauty, obviously portraying idealized pastoral scenes, and processions of priests and priestesses bearing strange ceremonial devices in adoration of what would be considered a radiant god. The art is of the most phenomenal perfection, largely Hellenic in idea, yet strangely individual. It imparts an impression of terrible antiquity, as though it were the remotest rather than the immediate ancestor of Greek art. Nor can I doubt that every detail of this massive product was fashioned from the virgin hillside rock of our planet. It is probably a part of the valley wall, though how the vast interior was ever excavated I cannot imagine. Perhaps a cavern or a series of caverns furnished the nucleus. Neither age nor submersion has corroded the pristine grandeur of this awful fane, for fane indeed it must be, and today, after thousands of years, it rests untarnished and inviolate in the endless night and silence of an ocean chasm. I cannot reckon the number of hours I spent in gazing at the sunken city, with its buildings, arches, statues, and bridges, and the colossal temple with its beauty and mystery. Though I knew that death was near, my curiosity was consuming, and I threw the searchlight's beam about in eager quest. The shaft of light permitted me to learn many details, but refused to show anything within the gaping door of the rock-hewn temple, and after a time I turned off the current, conscious of the need of conserving power. The rays were now perceptibly dimmer than they had been during the weeks of drifting, and as sharpened by the coming deprivation of light, my desire to explore the watery secrets grew. I, a German, should be the first to tread those ion-forgotten ways. I produced and examined a deep-sea diving of jointed metal, and experimented with the portable light and air regenerator. Though I should have trouble in managing the double hatches alone, I believed I could overcome all obstacles with my scientific skill and actually walk upon the dead city in person. On August 16th, I effected an exit from the U-29 and laboriously made my way through the ruined, mud-choked streets to the ancient river. I found no skeletons or other human remains, but gleaned a wealth of archaeological lore from sculptures and coins. Of this I can not speak now, save to utter my awe at a culture in the full noon of glory when cave dwellers roamed Europe and the Nile flowed unwatched to the sea. Others, guided by this manuscript, if it shall ever be found, must unfold. Oh, well, that's why it says this manuscript's found at the beginning, right? Must unfold the mysteries at which I can only hint. I returned to the boat as my electric batteries grew feeble, resolved to explore the rock temple on the following day. On the 17th, as my impulse to search out the mystery of the temple waxed still more insistent, a great disappointment befell me, for I found that the materials needed to replenish the portable light had perished in the mutiny of those pigs in July. Capitalist pig. Well, no, the Germans were, you know what, Ren and Stimpy reference anyways. My rage was unbounded. Well, actually, it's more than the Ren and Stimpy's reference to other stuff. But anyways, my rage was unbounded, yet my German sense forbade me to venture, unprepared, in an utterly black interior which might prove the lair of some indescribable marine monster or labyrinth of passages from whose windings I could never extricate myself. All I could do was to turn on the waning searchlight of the U-29 and with its aid walk up the temple steps and study the exterior carvings. The shaft of light entered the door at an upward angle, and I peered to see if I could glimpse anything, but all in vain. Not even the roof was visible, and though I took a step or two inside after testing the floor with a staff, I dared not go further. Moreover, for the first time in my life, I experienced the emotion of dread. I began to realize how some of the poor cleanse's moods had arisen. For as the temple drew me more and more, I feared its aqueous abyss with a blind and mounting terror. Returning to the submarine, I turned off the lights and sat thinking in the dark. Electricity must now be saved for emergencies. Saturday the 18th I spent in total darkness, tormented by thoughts and memories that threatened to overcome my German will. Cleanse had gone mad and perished before reaching the sinister remnant of a past unwholesomely remote, and had advised me to go with him. Was indeed fate preserving my reason, only to draw me irresistibly to an end, more horrible and unthinkable than any man has dreamed of? Clearly my nerves were sorely taxed, and I must cast off these impressions of weaker men. I could not sleep Saturday night, and turned on the lights. Regardless of the future, it was annoying that the electricity should not last out the air and provisions. I revived my thoughts of euthanasia and examined my automatic pistol. Turning morning, I must have dropped asleep with lights on, for I awoke in darkness yesterday afternoon to find batteries dead, and struck several matches in succession, and desperately regretted the improvidence which had caused long ago to use up the few candles we carried. After the fading of the last match I dared to waste, I sat very quietly without a light. As I considered the inevitable end to my mind, ran over the preceding events, and developed a hitherto dormant impression of which would have caused the weaker and more superstitious man to shudder. The head of the radiant entity in the sculptures on the rock temple is the same as that carven bit of ivory which the dead sailor brought from the sea, and which poor Cleanse carried back into the sea. And before some of the ice ages, and even possibly sunken places, not quite as confirmed, more sea level being different levels, have been found in the Atlantic and the Pacific. I was a little dazed by this coincidence, but did not become terrified. It is not only the inferior thinker who hastens to explain the singular and complex by the primitive short of the supernaturalism. The coincidence was strange, but I too sound a reasoner to connect circumstances which, to admit of no logical connection, are to associate in any uncanny fashion the disastrous events which led from the Victory affair to my present plight. Feeling the need of more rest, I took a sedative and secured some more sleep. My nervous condition was reflected in my dreams, for I seemed to hear of the cries of drowning persons, and to see dead faces pressing against the portals of the boat, and among the dead faces was the living, mocking face of the youth with the ivory image. I must be careful how I record my awakening today, for I am unstrung, and much hallucination is necessarily mixed with fact. Psychologically, my case is most interesting, and I regret that it cannot be observed scientifically by a competent German authority. Upon opening of my eyes, the first sensation was an overmastering desire to visit the rock temple, a desire which grew every instant, yet which I automatically sought to resist through some emotion of fear which operated in the reverse direction. Next there came to me the impression of light amidst the darkness of the dead batteries, and I seemed to see a sort of phosphorescent glow in the water through the portal which opened toward the temple. This roused my curiosity, for I knew of no deep-sea organism capable of emitting such luminosity. But before I could investigate, there came a third impression, which, because of its irrationality, caused me to doubt the objectivity of anything the senses might record. It was as if it was an aural delusion, a sensation of rhythmic, melodic sound, as of some wild yet beautiful chant or choral hymn coming from the outside through the absolutely soundproof hull of the U-29. Convinced of my psychological and nervous abnormality, I lighted some matches and poured a stiff dose of sodium bromide solution, which seemed to calm me to the extent of dispelling the illusion of sound, but the phosphorescence remained, and I had difficulty in repressing a childish impulse to go to the porthole and see its source. It was horribly realistic, and I could soon distinguish by its aid the familiar objects around me, as well as the empty sodium bromide glass of which I had no former visual impression in its present location. This last circumstance made me ponder, and I crossed the room and touched the glass. It was indeed in the place where I had seemed to see it. Now I knew that the light was either real or part of a hallucination, so fixed and constant that I could not hope to dispel it. So abandoning all resistance, I had ascended to the conning tower to look for the luminous agency. Might it not actually be another U-boat offering possibilities of rescue? As well as that, the reader accepts nothing which follows as objective truth, for since the events transcend natural law, they are necessarily subjected and unreal creations of my overtaxed mind. When I attained the conning tower, I felt the sea in general far less luminous than I had expected. There was no animal or vegetable phosphorescence about, and the city that sloped down to the river was invisible in blackness. What I did not see was not spectacular, not grotesque or terrifying. Yet it removed my last vestige of trust in my consciousness, for the door and windows of the undersea temple, hewn from the rocky hill, were vividly aglow with a flickering radiance. as from a mighty altar flame from within. Later incidences are chaotic. As I stared at the uncannily lighted door and windows, I became subject to the most extravagant visions. Visions so extravagant that I cannot even relate them. I fancied that I discerned objects in the temple, objects both stationary and moving, and seemed to hear again the unreal chant that had floated to me when I first awakened. And over all rose thoughts and fears which centered in the youth from the sea, and the ivory image whose carving was duplicated on the frieze and columns of the temple before me. I thought of poor Cleanse, and wondered where his body rested with the image he had carried back into the sea. He had warned me of something, and had not heeded, but he was a soft-headed Rhinelander, who went mad at troubles a Prussian could bear with ease. The rest is very simple. My impulse to visit and enter the temple had now become an inexplicable and imperious command which ultimately cannot be denied. My own German will no longer control my acts, and volition is henceforward possible only in minor matters. Such madness, when it was drove Cleanse to his death, bareheaded and unprotected in the ocean. I am but a Prussian and a man of sense, and will use the last of what little will I have. When first I saw that I must go, I prepared my diving suit, helmet, and air generator for instantly dawning, and immediately commenced to write this hurried chronicle in hope that it may some day reach the world. I shall seal the manuscript in a bottle and entrust it to the sea as I leave the U-29 forever. I have no fear, not even of the prophecies of the madman Cleanse. What I have seen cannot be true, and I know that this madness of my own will at most lead only to suffocation. When my air is gone, the light in the temple is a sheer delusion, and I shall die calmly like a German in the black and forgotten depths. This demoniac laughter which I hear as I write comes only from my own weakening brain. So will I carefully don my suit and walk boldly up the steps into that primal shrine, the silent secret of unfathomed waters and uncounted years. And sometimes the temples of old, the artifacts of old, if we can't understand, if we don't believe in their authority, they can still teach us something. They can still produce an experience. I've speaked ravingly about the Magical Egypt programs, but they're far from the only thing that points out how a lot of these buildings and stuff were used to produce an experience or other effects.